You are an entrepreneur, a professional, a speaker, or a coach. And although you've come a long way, it's time for you to take it to the next level. We've got you. This is the Author to Authority podcast. We'll help you use authority and influencer marketing to build your business stronger and faster by publishing a book. You'll hear from guests that are thought leaders in sales, marketing, networking, communication, social media, promotion, and business leadership. Let's do it. This is the Author to Authority podcast. And now your host, the extraordinary word ninja, Kim Thompson-Pinder.
Welcome to the 400th episode of the Author to Authority podcast. I'm your host, Kim Thompson-Pinder, and I'm here today with John Lusher, and he's going to help us celebrate this momentous occasion. And for once, I am not going to be doing the interviewing.
No?
So John's here today.
Really?
To interview me. So John, why don't you take a moment? I mean, you've been on the show before. You are a treasured part of the Author to Authority podcast. But for those who may not know you, take a few minutes and just introduce yourself.
Absolutely, Kim. Thank you for inviting me back on. It's always good when somebody asks you to be on their podcast or their live stream or whatever it is. But it's even better when they ask you back. I consider the second ask the most important because that means that you either did something right or you didn't do anything wrong. So it was one or the other. No, I'm happy to be here. I'm John Lusher. I am a digital marketer by trade, I guess you would say. I'm the Social Buzz Lab. We build buzz for brands. We build buzz for entrepreneurs, for professionals, depending upon, what they're looking to accomplish with either advertising, marketing, or digital media. We consider ourselves kind of a digital first marketing agency. That doesn't mean that we don't get into traditional forms of marketing, traditional forms of advertising, because we do. And we have some clients that use those day in and day out. But as we know, this medium that we're talking about here, it's digital audio, video type first anymore. So that's where we specialize in working with brands and professionals to really manage their digital media and to manage their social media. The easiest thing about social media is getting started because it's free to sign up. The hardest thing about social media is keeping it going because it's time, energy, and effort. And quite honestly, a lot of professionals, a lot of brands just don't have that time to devote to it. A lot of companies have small marketing departments or a marketing person, not a department. And that's where we come in. A lot of times we work with existing marketing teams or companies that don't have marketing team or department, and we're kind of their marketing arm, so to speak, almost to the point of like a fractional CMO, but mostly it's just working to supplement what they may have in place or fill those gaps to where they don't have that person on staff. So enjoy doing it. It's been doing it for over 10 years now. And the thing that we all know, especially about digital media with the recent introduction of Threads, is it's an ever-changing, ever-evolving, sometimes maddeningly frustrating medium. So we try to help keep the sanity level in check with our clients as they try to work through and utilize digital media.
Well, audience, first of all, I can tell you, John has helped me with quite a few things. He knows what he's talking about. Also, John, you forgot to mention something really important, so I'll just mention it here.
Okay.
John's episode was chosen as one of the top
that's right.
25 all-time Author to Authority episodes. And so played in August. And it was, if you want to hear John's episode, it's episode 396 and it played in August. So go on back and listen to it because that was an incredible interview that we did. Just was so powerful in terms of understanding marketing and especially in the LinkedIn realm. And just so you know, audience, I did sign up for Threads and I am using it. And I've only been on it a couple of weeks. I already have 200 followers.
It's a good medium. A lot of people are comparing it to the olden days of Twitter when it was more community feel, community based. And, I'm glad to see that Threads started out the way it did. Of course, we've all seen a lot of press lately that, the usage has dropped, the new signups have dropped. Well, that's typical. That happens with every social platform. There's a big rush for everyone to sign up. And part of that is the fear of missing out. Everybody else is on Threads. I got to be on Threads. So there's a piece of that to the puzzle. But I think it's also that people get involved with it and they realize, and this is one thing with Threads specifically, but really it applies to all social platforms. But they sign up and they realize they have to put in that time, energy, and effort again to build that community, to engage with that community. And quite honestly, Kim, where most people, not drop the ball, but where most people fall off with their social media is that engagement piece, because it truly takes time. Now on Threads, it seems like that is holding and people are still continuing to engage. The people that are active Threads users day in and day out are getting a lot of engagement. The people that are hit and miss, they're there one day and then 5 days later they come back and they're like, well, I'm not getting an engagement. Well, no kidding. It's the same on any social platform. It doesn't mean that you have to post every day, but you have to be active and engaging. So it'll be interesting to see how Threads plays out, as well as, the name change with Twitter to X and everything else. It's a constantly evolving landscape.
Yeah, you know what? We need to have you on. Let's do a Threads episode, because today's the
that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome.
We can spend the whole episode.
No, that would be awesome. Now, I would like to do that. We need to plan for that. But that's not the topic for today. The topic for today is to interview you, of course, and to celebrate the milestone of 400 episodes. And if you stop and think about that, and it's funny because I've been at this long enough to say I listened to podcasts the first time they became popular. Several years ago. And it was funny because they kind of leveled off for a while and then all of a sudden, they're back now. It's more
pandemic.
And I think the pandemic really drove a lot of the popularity of podcasts and audio networks and things like that. But my point being is I was starting down this point that I was trying to make is 400 episodes is quite a milestone. I think a lot of people that start podcasts, it's the stick-to-itiveness that falls off. So 400 episodes is incredible. And I guess the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about that many episodes is, one, why did you start the Author to Authority podcast? And give us some of that background as to not only why, but, was the burning desire in you that you wanted to bring this to the masses?
Well, there were several reasons I started the podcast. First of all, I love to teach and train. So when I was a child, my goal was to become a music teacher. And I unofficially did when my kids were little, because I spent 7 years volunteering in my kids' school teaching music.
Good for you.
But I love to teach and train. Even as an entrepreneur, my heart was, I want to help people and I want to teach and train them. That's how I got into writing books. I didn't necessarily want to become an author, but was a great medium for me to teach and train people. I was, I was in network marketing at the time, direct sales, and I wanted to make tools that my team could use to help them build their businesses. And books was a great way to do it, because I could hand them a book, they could read the book. I didn't have to be personally involved with them reading the book, but then they could come to me and ask questions, and we could put together a game plan so that they could implement the things that they had learned in the book. So that's how I started publishing books. And so back in 2019, one of my clients was a podcast specialist. And so all this time I'm watching him on his podcast, we're talking about podcasting in his book. I'm listening to him and I'm going, oh, maybe this is something I should do. Now, to be audience, and I've said this before, I'm not the hugest podcast person. Like I'm a visual medium. Like one of the reasons I'm a publisher is because I love books.
That makes sense.
But the more he talked about podcasts, the more I recognized that it was a medium that entrepreneurs love to use. So, if you're, a consultant, a professional, a speaker, when you're looking at getting that visibility, you can't just pick the mediums that you like.
Or that you're comfortable with.
Yeah. And so, and because this gentleman was my client, basically, I got a lot of it for free. I gave him a bit of a discount on the book. We traded off some things, and he set everything up for my podcast. I didn't have to set anything up. And he also showed me systems on how to use the podcast and monetize it right from the very start. So I was really fascinated with this because it was something I could do. I was doing Toastmasters at the time, so my speaking abilities had increased substantially. I felt way more comfortable in front of a microphone. And I thought, you know what? Let's go for it.
Why not?
Yeah. Yes, the impulsive one. I'm the impulsive entrepreneur that says, hey, that's cool. Let's just do it. We'll figure out all the problems later.
That's right.
Well, I've been wrong.
Well, that's a hallmark of a good entrepreneur, in my opinion, is sometimes we're wrong, sometimes we're right, sometimes we're completely off base. And I think one of the appeals of podcasting is just like the different social platforms, we all consume content differently. For some people, they literally, their entire day as they're doing other stuff, they have YouTube videos playing. That's how they consume content. They're video first. Other people are, voracious readers, whether it's a book, whether it's a magazine, whether it's a publication, white paper, they read the printed word more than anything else. But more and more, you're right, the pandemic pushed this a lot, but more and more people are using audio because it's a way for them to consume the content while they're doing a lot of other tasks. Typically, for me, on my typical day, as I'm working and doing other things, whatever that may be, I have my headphones in. I'm listening to a variety of podcasts, on different topics. And it to me, it's a much more efficient way of consuming content for people that are publishing podcasts or maybe even looking to start a podcast. It's a way to reach people where they live, so to speak. They may not always be on LinkedIn. They may not always be on Threads or YouTube. But, the podcast, the great thing about that is they can consume that content literally anywhere. Yeah. So I think it's a medium that lends itself to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I so agree, John. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to do it. I mean, to be honest, I got into it not realizing how much work a podcast is.
And it's funny you say that.
In the beginning, my client was doing all the background work.
Exactly.
It was easy. I just recorded the episodes, uploaded them. I was done.
Well, and I think really that's also a good way to describe just social media, digital media in general. It's easy to get into, just like podcasting. It's tough, though, to put in the work and to keep it going and to consistently produce that product. I always tell people, and I think you and I may have had this as part of our conversation, and it's definitely a conversation that I had with our mutual friend, Mike Garrison, who introduced us and who is, while this is streaming live, is sending me smart aleck text messages. But when you decide to start a podcast, it's like deciding to start a YouTube channel or publish blog articles. You need to decide on the frequency that works for you. Maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly. There's some people out there in the podcast world, the larger names, that are publishing 2 or 3 podcasts a week. And I'm like, well, yeah, they have an entire staff behind them. They just sit down and talk with what it was prepared for them. So they're doing the easy part. But for an entrepreneur or for a brand, they have to stop and think, how can I sustain this long term? And it's a testimony to you and your organization, the fact that we're sitting here talking about 400 episodes, because a lot of people never get to that point. They either start trailing off, or it just gets to be too much of a commitment that they cannot keep that going, for long term. So I think that's something for people to really think about. If they're going to launch something like a podcast or even a YouTube channel, think long term. That's why, don't put all your time, energy, and effort into making it exactly perfect. Put that time, energy, and effort into delivering a good product, but planning long term, because otherwise you're going to die out after a while. So that's good.
I mean, the first 3 years of the podcast, I mean, the first year was somewhat consistent, but definitely years 2 and 3 inconsistent. I mean, there was times I took a few months off there because I couldn't. I was now doing everything myself, and I didn't have the money, and my life was falling apart. And,
that's why we have best of episodes when life happens.
Yeah, exactly. But last year, after moved to Nova Scotia, got through the hurricane, got settled in Nova Scotia, was starting to rebuild the business again. I really took another look at podcasting, and I had decided, I'd already invested a lot of time in it, but it was time to really take massive action. And so that's when I went to 3 episodes a week, and I made a commitment to myself. And I think November, December, I think it was mostly 3 episodes a week. But from January 2023, it has been consistently 3 episodes a week, and not an episode has been missed, because this is the year to take massive action.
Well, good for you. Good for you. Well done. Speaking of episodes, and other than present company being excluded, talk about, out of 400 episodes, what are some of the favorite guests that you've had on the show, and explain why, just for the audience.
Well, going back to the beginning, I had Bob Berg on. He was my first guest episode. Please, well, you can't actually access it anymore because I lost the first 88 and they haven't all been reposted yet. But I probably won't repost that episode, though I probably should, because it wasn't.
You should.
On my end, it wasn't all that good.
But that's okay, because we all start from somewhere.
So first of all, I mean, I love Bob Berg. He is a dear man, amazing, mentor, teacher, and all that. But when I interviewed him, I knew him well enough to ask him to be on my show, but I didn't really. And I was so nervous, and I couldn't think of questions to ask him. And I didn't print out the questions that he had sent to me, and I'm trying to do this off the cuff. And he had just ended up carrying the whole episode for me.
So it was a 100% Bob episode.
Well, and I'm like, that's so awesome. And then I kept saying that. I'm like, I gotta think of something else to say.
That's he was a good guess, though.
Yeah. Well, some of the people I've had on are not necessarily famous, but they are incredible people. Ram Nayar, that was in the first series as well, and I am going to repost his actually, I'm going to do a new episode with him. He's a client of mine, but he's a Canadian Olympic coach.
Cool.
And so his was on fearlessness. I have had so many over the years that after 400 episodes, you kind of lose track. But I can't always tell you names, but here are the elements of my favorite episodes, and they're all the same.
Okay.
First of all, it was a wonderfully engaging conversation.
Right.
There was back and forth. We were kind of feeding off of each other. Sometimes it went in unexpected directions. And, those were the type of episodes where I'm like, I came out of thinking, oh, that's such a good episode. Like our conversations, John, are like that. When you and I talk, we feed off each other. We go back and forth. It's an engaging conversation. Lots of.
I was just getting ready to say it's engaging instead of just host and guest. And we've all heard podcasts like this, and we've heard interviews like this, to where you can tell that the only thing that they're doing is reading a question and the other person's answering. There's none of that back and forth. There's none of that. Okay, we start on this topic and then we go 6 lanes down the road into different topics. But to me, that's not just a sign of a great host or a great guest. It's that engagement of literally having a conversation in the back and forth piece. And to me, as a listener, that's what's going to keep my attention. If it's just somebody sitting there talking for 15 minutes, after about 5 minutes, I'm probably going to move on to another episode, because people want that back and forth, that engagement piece of it.
Yeah, I agree. And to be honest, like most guests I have, a lot of them send me the questions ahead of time that they generally get asked as part of their media kit or whatever. Do you know what? I never look at them.
Really? That is interesting.
To ask the questions that they get asked all the time. I want to know the stuff that they don't tell on other podcasts.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
I want to do like the deep dive. I want the good juicy. I've actually had a few people tell me, they're like, Kim, like you pulled stuff out of me I never thought I would say publicly. Not in a bad way, but just don't want the fluff. Like, I don't want the fluff that you share all the time. No, sorry. Well, it's not fluff. I don't want the generic material that you share all the time. Like, let's go deep. Into your story.
It can also become or come across, I guess, as too rehearsed.
Yeah.
Literally does sound like a rehearsed interview. And you have to guard against that, because there again, I think personally, that's a way to turn off your audience. If it's too rehearsed and it's just a litany of questions and answers, it really doesn't bring out anything that, quite honestly, if I wanted to take the time to do it, your guest is Bob Smith and he does this. Well, I could probably find out everything about Bob Smith by doing a Google search. And if it's just that generic type question and answers, it doesn't get into anything. It doesn't get into what are you passionate about and why. The things that a lot of times that people just overlook. And, with having a commitment like you've had with the podcast here, talking about as far as your favorite guests, does one particular episode stand out to you? As in, to my dying day, I'm always going to remember that episode. And if so, obviously I want to know why that episode stands out. But I also would like to know, as far as the guest in that episode, do they feel the same way about it? And I know that you may not know that specifically. John,
actually one of those episodes. That's why you were chosen as the top 25. One of the episodes that stands out is Jason Barnard. And he was talking about, what happens when people Google your name and, what shows up and could be done about it. And it was such an engaging conversation. And, one of the things that I remember was just something I had never heard before. When you do a podcast and, you're always talking about sales and marketing and all of these things, most of the time what the guests share, I've heard before. And it might be
makes sense.
Put in a really unique way, which is amazing.
But it's not new information necessarily.
Yeah, but Jason's that episode caught me off guard, because I was like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about Google. And then he gets into it and I was like, wow. I'm like, I've never heard this before. So that was one of the episodes. And actually his was chosen as one of the top 25 too. So his episode was right after yours. So go back to episode 396, listen to John's, and then go to episode 397 and listen to Jason's, because
it's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when the podcast host is learning something and that comes through on the podcast, I think that also helps validate to the listener, not just the podcast host, but the guest.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the whole, reputation and what happens if you search for yourself. I remember years ago when I first got into doing this, my colleague and I here in Southwest Virginia, we actually had weekly meetup groups. That was my colleague and I and local business owners, professionals that literally just wanted to get together and learn more about this new thing called social media and how to use it. One thing that we always, and I've always told people is, Google yourself, your name, and especially if you have a unique name, that makes it even more interesting, and see what comes back. Set up Google alerts for your name to where if it appears somewhere, you'll get a notification. And it's amazing even to this day that people don't do a lot of that type of research on themselves or loved ones or family members or whatever the case may be. And I've got someone that works with me that she even went through, and this switches over more to the business side. She even went through some training classes with Google as far as reputation management for their Google My Business listings and how to keep it not only secure, but also how to respond to negative reviews. And when you stop and think about that, it takes on a whole new era as far as thinking about, okay, not only am I out here on social and I'm trying to present myself and I'm trying to present my brand, what is happening behind the scenes that I don't see, that I would only see if I start searching my name and searching for my brand and searching for this and finding out what's literally out there. So I can see why that was very memorable, because that's something that more and more people need to take seriously and do for themselves.
Yeah, like one thing that, because, people, they Google me, right? So one of the things I've been hearing and I'm going to have to deal with is those MLM books that I wrote, 10, 12 years ago. They still generally tend to show up fairly high in my Google search. And the thing is, that's not who I am anymore. So people get confused because they're like, well, I saw your MLM books. Are you an MLM? No, I'm not. So as much as, those books, those books don't bring in a lot of sales and that. It's not like, I'm bringing in $1,000 a month, but I'm actually going to have to contact Kindle Direct Publishing and ask them to remove them because they're affecting my Google rankings, my Google presence, and when
your search.
Yeah, and it's not that I want to remove them because they are good books, but it's not who I am anymore. And I just kept them up there because they're helpful books for anybody in MLM and direct marketing. And I still have a heart for those people because I spent time in that industry. But now it's starting to affect my current business. So I'm going to have to contact KDP and say, listen, I need those books removed.
Yeah. And that way it'll eventually start lowering those in the rankings to where they don't show up immediately on a search, which makes sense. Smart move. Yeah. Well, talking about episodes and guests, have you ever had anyone that would be considered a famous personality or a famous person?
Well, the most famous person was Bob Berg.
Okay.
He was the most famous one that I've had on the show. To be honest, I mean, I feel like most of my guests should be famous people because they are
because of what they bring to the table.
They are true authorities in what they do, right? And I'm like, oh man, if the world just knew. If the world
That's
just
true. That's a good point. Well, you're 400 episodes in, and I know consistency is a big piece of the puzzle or a big portion. What in your mind has been the hardest thing about doing the podcast? Is it that consistency and longevity, or is it getting guests, or is it something completely different?
Getting guests is easy.
Okay.
I mean, and this is what every podcast person suffers from. So, but getting all the work done behind the scenes, that is hard. But I think one of the hardest things about this medium is I don't get a lot of feedback. So I'm not hearing from the audience. I'm not hearing what it is that they want, or I'm not being congratulated on it. And like one of these personality types is like, I want to reach a goal. I want it to be acknowledged. I want it
and
to
you
be
want to get the congratulations. That's right.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's not that I do it for the feedback, and I will continue doing it even if I never get feedback. But that's one of the harder things for me is the fact that, it's not like when you work a job. Okay. Not that most managers are good, but you at least get a raise if you've done a half decent job, right? Or if you're part of a group or tribe and you do something, they're there cheering you on, right?
You at least get an attaboy or something.
Yeah, exactly. And so, with this, it even though I'm interviewing guests, sometimes it feels very lonely podcasting. But to me, it's still worth it. But I'm just being honest. That's the hardest part. So, audience, can you come on LinkedIn, send me a message, just let me know that you like the podcast, something, anything, please.
Well, that feedback, the feedback to anything that we're trying to accomplish, whether we're, consistently out there writing blog articles or we're out there consistently, putting out video content, whether it's short form or long form video or podcasting or anything of that nature that we do, no matter what personality type we may be, we still like that validation. We like that, hey, you did a good job. I enjoyed that article. That's a great take on the topic of the day, whatever. Great episode. And we all want that. It's human nature. So I can see that. And in a medium where publishing, it's tough because you have the pressure to consistently publish and get out good content, but then you also have that pressure that you put on yourself or that we put on ourselves of making sure that it's the best product possible, but not getting that feedback saying, yes, it was good or no, it wasn't good or whatever. And having that feedback is key, I think. So that's a good point. That's a really good point. Now, for you, Kim, what would you say, as far as what you get out of the podcast, and I'm not necessarily saying, new clients or pieces of business, but what is it that you get out of the podcast? What results excite you, at least from the podcast itself?
Well, basically, I get a university level education for free.
That's a good point.
A lot of the guests that I've had on the show, if I've had a problem or an issue and they're a specialist, because I've let them on the show, if I contact them, a lot of times they'll donate a free hour to me because I've done something for them. They'll donate a free hour. They really enjoyed the interview. It was a good interview. I made them really shine. They'll give me a free hour of time and answer my questions and help me solve my problems.
Interesting. That's a good point.
The network of people that I've been building through this podcast, that's very valuable to me. The relationships, the relationships with the guests on the show, that has been something that I didn't expect from the podcast, but so grateful for.
Well, and I think the one thing that, if there's one glaring thing as far as social media that people still, I can't believe I'm saying this in 2023, but that people still overlook, is the value in those relationships.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I saw, and I've seen this meme several times, talking about how, have you ever had somebody that you thought was a best friend betray you, but you feel closer to somebody that you've never met in person, but that you've talked to online for the past 2 years? And it's kind of that back and forth of, we build these relationships virtually because, let's be realistic, probably a good 75-90% of the time we never meet the person face to face in real life, as the saying goes. But we build these virtual relationships and we build this virtual network that in some ways provides more value than a in-person network, without naming any names. But to me, I think that is a point to hammer home, is the fact that with doing this, you are connecting with these people that chances are you would have never known or never met. Definitely, for the most part, you would have never run into them at a local networking event because, a lot of times they aren't local. So there's a value to that I think even today people overlook that. I mean, some of the people that are literally my longest friends that I engage with on a daily basis are people that either I've never met face to face, or that just, they live far enough away that probably would never happen anyway. But it doesn't discount the fact that I've gotten to know them very well. We've either done business together, or we've talked business, or we have something in common that furthers that friendship, furthers that relationship. And I think it's something that even today people overlook that. So that's a valuable point.
Yeah.
So has anything really funny ever happened on the show?
So,
or should I say funny or should I say embarrassing? But no, let's go with funny.
So I had things like the phone ring in the middle of recording episodes, and it's kind of hard to. I've had things drop.
Yep, I've had that.
I'm a fidgeter. Like, got something going. And if you're listening to us on the podcast, on the video, I'm sitting twirling a hair elastic. So sometimes these things are like metal and they drop and they make a big bang out of the middle of nowhere. Sometimes I've had an external noise that you can't hear because this is a directional microphone, and I'll jump and people look at me. It's like,
wow, they didn't hear anything.
Exactly. I think some of the funniest moments in the podcast came with the episodes between me and Juanita Witten-Radko. And these are a lot of the older episodes. She was my co-host for probably at least a year or two. And the thing about Juanita is she's been my best friend since I've been 14 years old.
Wow.
And awesome. So when we talk sometimes, we just feed off each other like crazy. And I know what she's going to say next.
Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's not.
We had some really funny moments there where, it was just one of these off the cuff things. And the two of us are busting the gut laughing because, we're just like that. Right. And, one of my favorite episodes that her and I did together, was it celebrating 30 or I think it was 35. We were celebrating 35 years of friendship. So we did a whole episode on that. And a lot of the episode was sharing embarrassing stories about each other.
Of course. Well, I come from a background in high school and a few times since then as a part-time job, worked in radio as an on-air announcer. And one thing it teaches you to do is try to keep control of your composure when something else is happening around you. Luckily, it was just audio. There wasn't video. But dating myself, but that's okay because I'm old. Back when I was working at a local radio station part-time when I was even still in high school and out of high school, we literally actually had 45 records. So there's nothing like being in there, hot mic, talking about something, and a stack of records behind you falls over. Or, one of the other favorite things was because the way it was set up with the control board and the microphone, you could either stand, like I'm doing now, or you could sit. Well, if you were standing up and talking, the microphone had a habit of slowly descending down. And it sounds like an old Tim Conway sketch or comedian sketch where you're kind of sinking down as the microphone is going because you're still talking. It kind of teaches you to, ignore everything that's going on around you and focus on what you're talking about. And that is so incredibly hard to do. So hard to do. And it's funny that you should mention like something falling or a phone ringing. Since the pandemic and a lot of people got used to being on Zoom because they had to as they were working remotely, I think we've all gotten a little better kind of mastering that, focusing on what's in front of us and avoiding the distraction of, something over here, or avoiding the distraction of the dog or the cat that's getting ready to jump up on the laptop. And really, it's really funny because good thing about live video or like, a live streaming event like we're doing here that's turned into a podcast is you have things like that happen. And at least to me, that is kind of the human factor. It's not so polished
and perfect
so polished and perfect that nothing wrong ever happens. My favorite podcasts are the ones that are just like what we're doing, having that conversation, the back and forth. Somebody, may bust out laughing and can't contain themselves. They may drop something. I don't want something that's 100% perfect because then I know it's too produced and it's too rehearsed. So, or the go with the flow type person.
So speaking of that, there was one episode, Tim Fitzpatrick, and I don't have my sheets right in front of me, so I can't tell you which episode number it was, but we had to record that 3 times.
Oh my God.
So the first 2 times his internet kept dropping out so badly we couldn't do a full episode.
You couldn't figure
we couldn't pull enough pieces together to do the episode because we'd get like a minute and a half in or 2 minutes in, and in the middle of a word he would drop out. And so we had to record it 3 times.
Pete.
Now it was worse than when we did, because it was an amazing episode, but that was like, oh. And
anything worth doing, you you have to have patience and keep going.
Well, and even just having systems in place, like even in Ontario, we get power outages, but here they're a little bit more unexpected. And so now I've got, obviously my laptop has a battery, but I've got a UPS to keep the internet
got the
going.
power back. Yep. You have
to keep the internet going so you can finish off whatever it is you were doing. My husband is back in school. He's gone back to college, and they don't do their exams online. They actually write their exams physically on paper, but they're on Zoom, and they have to be sitting in such a way that the invigilator, which is the person that watches you write an exam, could see everything they were doing. So
that way you can't cheat.
10 minutes before the exam ended, we completely lost power. I heard the line snap outside the house. It was a big boom, and it snapped off the house, and the power was gone. So, and we didn't have the UPS or anything. My husband is not happy. He's trying to run out, get the generator going, get it all hooked up. We realized we didn't have, the house is set up so it's got a pony panel. So the whole basement, and I think there's like 1 or 2 outlets upstairs, are powered off this pony panel, but not here in my office.
But not in your office area.
Where the internet was. So he got the power all back on, still didn't have internet. He had to think, so then he had to run cables into my office to get power so he could get back online. And he's thinking, oh man, I failed. They're going to fail me. Like, because, he could have been cheating the whole time, right?
That's true.
He did warn the teacher that, we were having a pretty bad winter storm and there was a chance the power would go out. But, one of the things that I think is important in podcasting is authenticity and integrity. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because my husband walks in integrity, and because he does, when he finally got back online, the invigilator had already contacted his teacher, and his teacher said, you know what? Don't worry about Ross. He will not cheat. And so they accepted his exam.
That's good.
But I think when it comes to podcasting too, integrity is important. Producing a good, honest show. And it doesn't mean that's not professional. It doesn't mean that, it can't be hard hitting or any of those things. But I think, when you're podcasting, you have to be authentic. I could go into my professional voice and go into, my interviewer mode and all these things, but it's
not engaging, and really that's not what people want to hear. They want to hear, at least in my opinion, they want to hear a conversation. They want to hear 2 people, again, that engaging, that back and forth, having a conversation. And I think that's what sets apart good podcasts and sets apart good podcasts from mediocre podcasts. And I think the engaging back and forth is the key to all of it, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Well, as we're heading to wrap this up, this has been a lot of fun. What's the one thing, if you can narrow it down to one thing, what's the one thing that you would like to leave people with? Either about your business, about the podcast, about your experiences, whatever the case may be. What's the one thing that you would like to leave them with?
When I do keynotes and other different things like that, or people ask me for that final thought, I always go back to one thing. Don't be afraid to shine in your business. Don't be afraid to be visible. If you want to build your business quicker, the more visible you are, the quicker you build your business. Because you let people in, you let them see you, you let them be a part of your world. You give them a tremendous amount of value, and guess what? They're going to want to work with you, right? So don't be afraid to shine.
That's true. And we connect with people. We don't connect we don't connect with brands like we connect with people. If you identify someone as that authority, to play off of your business, author to authority, you're more likely to listen to them, pay attention to them, and want to continue that connection with them. And that's something that brands can never duplicate. That's why a lot of times when we talk with business owners, we try to encourage them. For your brand, someone has to be the face of that brand. And it doesn't mean that they have to have a video or their picture out there on every piece of content that they put out. That's not the point. The point is people will connect more with that face of the brand than they will with a logo. And I think it's important for people to realize that, because if not, kind of get lost in the sea of other content that is out there from brand A, brand B, brand C. And that's why a lot of brands use brand ambassadors, influencers, things like that to represent them. And it's not just to have access to those influencers' social accounts. It's the fact that you're getting someone to be the face of your brand that people will connect with. So I think that's really important. Good point.
Yeah.
Very good point.
And here's the other thing. You might suck at first.
Probably.
I mean, as much as I should release those first 10 episodes, there's a part of me that doesn't want to, because
you really need to.
Yeah.
You really need to.
I will do a special segment for the show where I'll release them when I get time, besides, putting out 3 episodes a week. But the thing is, just remember is that you're not going to be great at something when you start it.
You won't.
I was not great when I started this podcast. And it's only been in the last 100 or so episodes
that you really find your footing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And people have commented, guests have commented on my interviewing skills and how great I am at interviewing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was 300 episodes in.
Well, and if you, for an example, if you have a favorite YouTuber that you love to watch their videos, go to their videos tab and go back to the beginning. You will be shocked at the difference. And you're right. There's a good chance that you'll suck at first, but it's putting in that work, putting in the consistency. If you don't like being on camera, nobody does, except people that are paid very well for it. And even they probably don't. But you have to work through that to get your message out and to keep engaging with people. So, from my standpoint, I would encourage anyone that sees this to subscribe to your podcast, to the Author to Authority podcast. Not only subscribe, but leave a review. And, a lot of people overlook that. A lot of people don't remind their listeners to do that. But leaving a review, even if it's just the 5 stars, that makes a difference to the podcast. It makes a difference to people finding the podcast. So I would encourage everyone to do that as well. But this has been fun, Kim. This has been a good time. Thank you.
So just to give you guys a little sneak peek of what's coming up, John and I are talking about doing a weekly show together on LinkedIn.
Possibly so,
we probably will publish some of those episodes on the podcast as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it'll be fun.
We'll do some bonus episodes.
That sounds like a great idea. Sounds like a good plan to me. Stay tuned.
Well, this has been a longer than usual episode, audience, but thank you for joining us and celebrating the 400th episode. I can honestly say that it is a joy, a privilege, and an honor to be able to serve you in this way and to give you information that you need that's going to help you move your business forward. So this has been John Lusher and Kim Thompson-Pinder on the Author to Authority podcast. If you loved it, shout. And we will see you on the very next episode. Bye now.
You've been listening to the Author to Authority podcast. The extraordinary word ninja, Kim Thompson-Pinder, has helped over 200 entrepreneurs, professionals, speakers, and coaches write and publish their books that have become incredible marketing tools for their business. And many of those have gone on to become Amazon best-selling authors and have used their books to land high-level clients and get on big stages. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at www.authortoauthoritypodcast.com. See you next time.